It's great to have you with us, Professor Lennox, and perhaps you can tell our listeners who maybe might know a lot about you, a bit about your background and a bit about your Christian faith.
Well, I come from the lowlands of Scotland originally about 400 years ago, but I was brought up in Northern Ireland, and I'm now Professor of Mathematics in the University of Oxford. But at the same time, I am actively engaged in what one might call the intellectual defense of Christianity, because I believe it to be true. I believe it to be true as a scientist, and I find it important for me to be active in combating the kind of attitude that says that atheism is the default position in the Western world. I don't believe that is the case at all. And that has led me into some very high-profile debates with people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, all of which can be seen, by the way, if people have a look at my website, johnlennox.org. So you can get a fuller picture there.
Now, I know you, when you were a young man, you spoke earlier on about, the challenges you faced as a young Christian. Tell us, how was it studying as a scientist and being a Christian at the same time?
Well, I was very fortunate with my parents because Northern Ireland has a reputation for sectarianism. My parents were not sectarian. They employed people equally across the religious divide. So I didn't grow up with all that sectarian baggage. And also, very importantly, they allowed me to think and read widely. So when I got to Cambridge, I'd already read a lot of stuff. So in one sense, I was ready for exposure to the opposites of Christianity. And I seized the opportunity to check out my faith by comparing and contrasting it with other people who didn't share my worldview, nor indeed didn't share my background. And I've been doing that ever since. And one of the main things that has consolidated my Christian faith is seeing how it has real answers to the big questions that can be thrown at it from any direction. So life has been very kind to me in that way and giving me that kind of opportunity at all kinds of different levels.
Well, I tell you, Dr. Lennox, you've been a huge inspiration for myself, and what I love is your passion to keep the Christian faith alive. It's absolutely remarkable. And you spoke about this morning about your latest book on Daniel. Perhaps you can share a little bit about that and the inspiration behind it and why you chose Daniel.
Well, because Daniel was a young man who lived at a very critical time in ancient history, about the 6th century BC, was taken from a monotheistic small culture in Judah around Jerusalem and suddenly catapulted into university life in Babylon. Different language, different laws, different culture. And yet not only did he rise to very high position in that empire, the one that succeeded it, he maintained not only his belief in God and his devotion to God, but his witness to God. So against the cultural background of the superpower of the ancient world, he maintained a very public defense of his faith in God. And I find that inspirational, I really do, because we're in a very similar situation.
So what would you say to our young scientists who may be sitting on the side of the fence regarding their faith? What would you say to encourage them? Because as you say, we live in a very highly secular world.
Yes, we do.
So if you're going into university, you're going to face all of this. You're going to face all these challenges. What would you say to these young people?
Well, if they're interested in science, I would say to them, and forgive the personal reference, but I wrote a book some years ago called God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? And I wrote it for such people who often in school have never heard very much about the ins and outs of the so-called science-religion debate. And they've grown up with a kind of Dawkins idea that in order to be an intelligent person, you've got to choose between science and God. And it's very easy, actually, to show that that's nonsense. And I wrote this book for young people like that who want to navigate their way through this discussion. And again, on my website, there's loads of discussions and talks and interviews, bite-sized, that will make accessible some of the issues that dominate this conversation today.
I love what you mentioned earlier on about the Bible being a book of values. Could you just expand a bit on that?
Well, what I would say is that I wish to demonstrate to people that the Bible is not just a nice little book of devotional stories, but actually has something to say into our culture. And it deals with the big questions of life, the problem of pain, the problem of evil, the existence of God, and so on. And by explaining it in an accessible way, I hope to show people its power so that they can come to a rational judgment as adults for themselves and grow out of this idea that the Bible is for the very young and the very old, to give them some kind of prop which is not realistic, so that believing in God is about the level of believing in Santa Claus. I want to dismiss that kind of thing. After all, we don't meet many adults who've come to believe in Santa Claus. We do meet many who've come to believe in God.
Professor, I'll leave it at that because I know you're going to have a cup of coffee. So listen, thank you so much for you and for your ministry. You really are an inspiration. And
it's a pleasure. I'm always glad to talk to people on the radio. And
especially when they're Irish people too, it's even better, isn't it?
That's right.
Well, listen, thank you so much.
My pleasure.